My name is Dr. Joan Palmiter Bajorek, and this talk is called Voice by Everyone for Everyone. I am so delighted to speak with you and talk about the future of tech. So let's jump in. My name is Joan. A little bit about me. I primarily identify as a linguist and a researcher. So I research natural language processing and natural language understanding, automatic speech recognition, ASR, and I'm a voice technologist. I've previously worked at Nuance as a senior experience designer, and I have a PhD from the University of Arizona in the field of speech language technology, where I really focused on multimodal interfaces, the future of user experience with tech, and kind of human-computer interaction. My publications have been published in Adobe XD, Cambridge University Press, and Harvard Business Review, among others. I'm one of the top 11 influencers in the voice ecosystem and recently spoke at CES. I also have spoken at every voice summit, I'm excited to say, and I am an Alexa champion. So all this to say that I have a lot of depth of experience, as well as am really involved and engaged with the voice ecosystem today. I'm coming to you from Seattle, so I definitely have an American perspective on a lot of these things, but really also try to think about the international impact of tech. The evolution of my research, especially in the past few years, has really looked at big data, high impact tech, voice and multilingual, multimodal tech. So I previously have done research on natural language processing in Twitter and looking at different variations. I've looked at EdTech, educational technology tools, specifically in the voice applications, in phonetics and acoustics. I'm looking at Rosetta Stone and Duolingo, Babbel, Mango, and Immerse Me, which is more of a VR tool. I've thought about voice SEO, kind of the future of user experiences and preferences in that capacity, as well as biases in these systems. So this kind of research program informs my knowledge of the field today and where I see the field evolving to, which you'll see in this work. Today, I am happy to say that I am the CEO and founder of Women in Voice, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but I'm also the head of conversational research and strategy at Versa. Versa is the largest voice agency in the world, headquartered in Australia, but I am based in Seattle. So let's jump into it about the content for today. Wildly brilliant, disruptive, innovative, creative ideas do not come from one small, homogeneous population. And I think this is a relatively easy and obvious idea, but the way tech is constructed today and the way of who constructs tech sometimes is really small and isolated. And so one of the key takeaways I want you to think about today is that wildly brilliant ideas come from everyone and everywhere. And that's one of the things I want us to talk about specifically today. So the outline of today's talk is the future is multimodal, multilingual, and by everyone and for everyone. And these are kind of big topics. I'm going to unpack them and give plenty of examples about inspiring projects going on all around the world that really give different perspectives about the voice ecosystem and the future of tech. So let's jump in. What is multimodal? Now, this word is becoming more and more popular, multimodal. It's also sometimes called omnichannel. There's a lot of different words speaking about this concept. Multimodal is integrated builds using multiple modes or modalities. For example, thinking about text, audio, video, AR, VR, gesture, voice, really all inputs to systems and outputs. So in this slide, I have an example of Google Assistant that runs on mobile, thinking about Google Home devices, different IoT, smart home devices for temperature, but really thinking about how we interpret data and what the back end, where it's getting that data set from, back and forth. On the top right, we have an example of gesture, so how computer vision might be used in medical contexts that enhances visual and textual inputs, that we have touchless interfaces that really rely on different modalities and ways of interacting with content. Lastly, here's an example on the bottom right of augmented reality to augment the things we see around us and what the computer sees to have new imaginings of what furniture could look like in this example through different lenses. So these are different multimodal perspectives of what exists today. And really, I want you to think about what exists today and what will exist in the future and what you hope to see and what you hope to build, hopefully. Some more examples of multimodal interfaces. Here on the top left, we have an example from, I believe it's Hong Kong, where there are examples of tech from Alibaba and Baidu that have similarities to some of the tech that we have in the United States, but also different variations for populations in political content and touch screens. On the top right here, we have a female blogger from Kuwait who reviews different tech and has actually built Alexa skills, I believe in Arabic, related to her prayer practices and different times of her days. So really thinking about how people around the world might be using tech in different languages and for different use cases. On the bottom left here, we have an example from my company Versa in Australia, partnering with Domino's and Google Assistant, that you can ask the Google Assistant to get you a pizza and bring you a pizza. And my Versa CEO has used this in demos, and it's been so effective. People are shocked at how fast the pizza arrives at the venue. Super cool. And this Google Action is supported in multiple languages. And lastly, here's an example of a man using a device in Asia that not only has video and audio and textual inputs, but also pivots to follow around the room so that it's motion detecting as well as back and forth. So really thinking about what multimodal interfaces could look like, and it really depends on the use case, thinking of, does it make sense here that it uses gesture? Would it make more sense for it to have better audio? I think really thinking about what exists today, again, and what could exist in the future, and what you would like to be using. Another example of multimodal and different languages is Abhishek Singh created an American Sign Language and Alexa skill build that used computer vision to capture American Sign Language, that it goes into the Alexa system and comes out as a textual input, a visual on a screen. So really thinking about how we are communicating with tech, and that American Sign Language is a language that how they communicate with each other. So all of this goes into the concept of what is multilingual. And I think that's a more common term, multiple languages, right? That around the world, around 7,000 languages are spoken, although that number is changing, but that those languages come from different human language families. And when we think about, Romance languages or tonal languages and different language families, of where the heritage of those languages and the backgrounds of them come from. I think this is a beautiful graph that really thinks about the world in a broader picture. Because as we integrate different languages and different dialects into tech, perhaps you've seen the Scottish elevator comedy skit from the BBC, where they have an example of two Scottish comedians in an elevator where they've installed a voice recognition system, but unfortunately doesn't understand Scottish English, which has a lot of implications culturally and politically about what languages are understood and dialects are supported by voice recognition systems today. That's a comedic example, but potentially in real life, it could be quite scary if your elevator does not understand you and you get stuck in a box. A lot of thinking about what languages computers understand and how computer scientists and linguists are conceptualizing of tech. There's something called the Bender rule that comes from Dr. Emily Bender, who's a professor at the Department of Linguistics. She's also the director of the Computational Linguistics program at the University of Washington here in Seattle. And the Bender rule is that we always name the language or languages we're working on. So that if we are basing our tech and basing our computational processes off of a language, we need to name it. Is it English? Is it Arabic? Is it Korean? And really knowing that English, especially American English, is neither synonymous nor representative of natural language. Now, here in natural language, we're not talking about natural language means human-based languages. So there's lots of different ways of communicating, bees and dolphins communicate in different modalities, but natural language is the way people actually communicate and not necessarily grammatically based by whom, to whom one is speaking, and what might be expected grammatically, but how we actually speak. So when I use the phrase natural language, I'm talking about human language. But this idea of the Bender rule is very popular in computational linguistics. If you're a computational linguist, you probably already know about this concept, but it's really shocking how much research doesn't even cite which language it's basing its ideas off of and which data sets it's looking at that brings forward. And we extrapolate those understandings and theories from one idea, whereas we might need to open up our perspectives and really think about where we're getting those insights from. For example, natural language has various scripts and symbols that represent our sounds and our ideas. So here are examples from Arabic, Tamil, Hebrew, and Korean, and how these scripts have different variations and different styles. And we think about scripts and symbols, we think sometimes we're reading them left to right, right to left. Sometimes it's up to down, right? The way we conceptualize them visually in different capacities, that there's a lot of variation and a lot of beauty and different perspectives that come from even the script of these languages. And not only how the syntax and morphology works in the way pieces of words fit together and the ordering of those languages, but also when we think about the acoustic properties of those languages. When we think about language, especially, here's an example with tonal languages, where the tone is and where it's going. In English, it's more of a personality thing. Oh, I'm so excited, right? We have different perspectives. But in Cantonese, there are 6 tones, and these tones have meaningful differences. So I don't speak Cantonese, but in these 6 different examples where you're saying the word si, and depending on where it begins and how it moves across, it could mean poetry, history, try, something, market, and B, that it's really meaningful about where those tones are placed. And American English speakers have actually quite a bit of trouble, not only with the movement of tone that's not meaningfully contrastive in English, semantically, but also where it begins from. So really thinking about not only the written differences of these languages, but also how they sound, how we interpret them, how humans are processing what sound is and isn't, and how that's melodic and meaningful in pitch and tonality. As we move forward with thinking about the really broad perspectives of multilingualism, another example of how language is more playful and creative than we might conceptualize. Hinglish is an example of switching between Hindi and English while speaking. And if you've ever watched any Bollywood, you'll see that this is extremely common, but also in interviews, this is how people naturally speak in many parts of the world. And it's an example of code switching different pieces. So the rise of Hinglish is very strong in India, and India is the world's 7th largest economy. The BBC actually did a documentary about Hinglish being taught in schools and how this represented a better mapping of here's what you're learning in the classroom, and here's what people are speaking outside on the streets in their communities. So really thinking about language, not necessarily in a very, very textbook way, but really thinking about contemporary language so that you can actually communicate with people in the way that they actually communicate. Pretty cool. So from these ideas about what multilingualism is and where we're coming from in different multiple modalities, hopefully I've broadened some of those conceptual frameworks that you have as a linguist. That's what I got to do. I really want to give now some examples of why the future of voice tech and tech in general is by everyone and for everyone. And I'm going to go back to my most famous publication, published in Harvard Business Review, called Voice Recognition Still Has Significant Race and Gender Biases. And I'm certainly not the only person to write about this topic, but it's hard and it's unfortunate of how biased some of our systems are today. Research has been conducted that shows disparities in different speakers, that if you are white, if you are mixed race, if you are Black, if you are a different gender, if you're different age, if you speak a different dialect, how these systems perform and how accurate they are to understand your voice. So in research, I pulled out kind of a scoreboard of what it might be for my friend Josh, for myself, and potentially for someone who is a mixed race female. We use the name Jada here, that if a system performs maybe at an A-, like a 92% for a white male, that for me, it might perform at like a C+ of understanding my voice for the same text. And that for a mixed race female, it might perform at a D+. And in speech sciences, we really think about 90% is the threshold that we at least need to hit, that there's a 10% error, but mostly the system understands you. Obviously, we'd want perfection and to understand everything. But in reality, most of these systems wouldn't hit a 90% mark for understanding people. And this isn't just any system. These are really big tech giant systems and how they can really improve. And speech scientists at those companies are really working on this. There's a lot of movement that's going on, especially in deep learning, when we're thinking about big data sets and incorporating more people in these data sets. I've seen examples where people are basing their systems on TED Talks, and TED Talks are fantastic, but a lot of them, some research has shown that TED Talks potentially are 70% white male speakers. And when we're basing a system off of specifically white male voices, how does that extrapolate well to other people? And it's honestly impressive that they extrapolate well at all, but that we really need to look at the size of our data sets, the patterns within our data sets, how we're thinking about who is speaking, inputting data, and how the outputs work or don't work for them. I think it's really important when talking about these topics that it's probably not intentional. I don't believe that people are designing systems that are biased, trying to send those out into the world. I don't believe that at all. What I believe is that we need more diverse people to be on those development and design teams and saying, hey, this might not work for my aunt. How can we change this? Or this may not work for my nephew. I'd really like to think about how we can incorporate that data set or some of those findings for different people, that it really could be by everyone and for everyone. Similar to this, there's other research that was recently put out by Stanford. I'm really passionate about this topic, and it's one of the reasons that I'm so eager to be working on development and designing tech of the future, because voice recognition is just one of the pieces of tech and how we can really make it inclusive and work for everyone. Because if the tech doesn't work for you, people won't be buying it. They won't be adopting it. They won't retain the usage of these products, which we want as companies. We're hoping that people like our tech and use it. So that's a little bit about my research. I'm going to show some more examples of other awesome projects in the ecosystem. Potentially you've heard of Soapbox Labs that works on tech for kids. A lot of tech is designed for, honestly, millennials. But there are young people, there are more elderly people that also need tech to work for them. So the CEO, Dr. Patricia Scanlon, is a speech scientist herself. She's given a TED Talk, awesome. And she saw in tech that I knew voice tech was getting big, but no one was looking at kids' stuff. So that company has evolved and really looked at phonetic pieces of child speech. And here's an example of some phonemes that they have really tailored the voice tech to kids' voices, specifically, I believe, age 3 to 7. They recently raised a Series A of 6.5 million and are based in Ireland. So I think this is a really awesome example of thinking outside of the norms of the box, saying, ooh, voice tech is blowing up. Ooh, here's a different perspective of how I can support different people who are using tech. Really cool product. I recommend you check them out. Similarly, in the vein of kid tech, Novel Effect is a really cool company based here in Seattle. And the co-founders, Melissa and Matt Hammersley, realized that they could use tech to really augment the reading experience, and how when you open a book and you speak, that voice recognition can be used to have a soundscape that reads along. So when you're reading the book, you can hear the growl of cats, or you can hear the wind through the breeze of the landscape of the book. They support many, many different books, different sound effects. Right now, my mom is speaking or reading books to the neighbor kids and has tried this product and found it utterly magical. I've seen lots of demos, but I think it's really cool to think about how we can augment experiences that currently happen of parents reading to kids, and make it more magical and make it interactive. And that when kids are reading to themselves, that they can actually hear things roar when they say things correctly and are improving their literacy and speaking skills. So I know they're doing far more than that these days. They're doing some SaaS builds, but I really recommend you check out Novel Effect and a different perspective of how voice tech can be used, and especially for parents and children. It's pretty cool. Another example, not only for kids, but for older populations, is the 50 and older cohort. Heidi Culbertson runs the studio Marvi that really thinks about, is this tech designed for the elderly? When they're thinking about the type of tech and needs that they have, different use cases, what is being designed for them? How does it work or not work for different populations? And there are a lot of people that are getting older. And I think being thoughtful about, whoa, we can design for those people too. It's a really, really cool and important field. So go Heidi Culbertson. When we think about people who speak differently, kids, the elderly, we can also think about people who might be losing their voice for medical reasons, like Stephen Hawking's, and that systems can be customized to meet their personalities. Dr. Rupal Patel is the CEO of Vocal ID. When they create custom digital voices for people who may have lost their voice or have impairments to speaking, that if you're a young girl, for example, as in this picture example, that you may not want a clunky adult male voice to represent your voice and how you are speaking. So having it tailored to you and to your personality, that voice means something. There's a representation of your personality and how you express yourself. Vocal Idea is also doing voice banking and custom builds for companies about what that sonic branding is about. When we think about what the data set is based on and who it's representing, Mozilla is working on a project called Common Voice that refers actually or relates a lot back to my Harvard Business Review article about bias and what the data set is that we're building off of. Common Voice is a project helping machines learn how real people speak and diverse people speak, how a lot of different types of people, and getting a data set that represents them. So this is voice data that's freely and publicly available. You can actually record your voice and contribute to this database. I've contributed my voice by recording myself and speaking the different sentences provided, tagging it with some of my demographic data, and donating it to this project. It's a really cool one. I recommend you check it out and consider donating your voice to make speech tech understand a lot of different people a lot better, and have more balanced data sets. Last few examples here. Project Understood is a collaboration with the Canadian Down Syndrome organization and Google AI. And they work on getting people with Down syndrome into Google and recording different speech samples similar to the Common Voice one, but specifically around Down syndrome, that Google's API can better understand people who have Down syndrome, who speak differently from other people who do not have Down syndrome, and really thinking about, can it understand them? How can we empower people with differences to be able to still use this tech and the accessibility of that capability for them? Another group of people that absolutely want to use these products. And I want to bring it back to around the world who's building and the diverse people who are building it. And this relates back to my organization, Women in Voice. So Women in Voice is an empowerment organization, an international one. We have a huge digital presence, and we also have strong local presence. We're less than 2 years old and have 11 chapters in 8 countries, which is super cool. Here are some examples of a Mexican hackathon where Mexican companies partnered with us, and we ran hackathons to do design thinking and builds and learning more in different workshops. Here are my ambassadors in Japan, getting excited about voice tech in Japan and different projects to work on. And here's another example, ambassadors in Madrid in our Spanish chapter doing presentations at Google Startup. So all around the world, people are getting together, creating chapters, finding community, and Women in Voice. We just launched our Latinx chapter, but really thinking about inclusion in a broader sense. Women in Voice is, as relatively self-descriptive, women in voice. We think about celebrating, connecting, amplifying, and empowering women and gender diversity in voice tech. We recently launched our new website with our new branding, womeninvoice.org. Check it out. My team did a phenomenal job. Really different ways to connect on social media, especially LinkedIn, Twitter, where we're most present, but also on Facebook and Instagram, where you can find events, you can connect, you can find local chapters. And one of our slogans is join the party, because we're really excited about everyone joining. There is absolutely a place for allies and people who do not identify as women and gender minorities to support the ecosystem and join us to really think about the future and how it includes everyone. So here's more of our mission statement, as I mentioned, with this empowering, amplifying, connecting, and amplifying diverse voices. So returning back to the idea that I started this talk with of wildly brilliant, disruptive, innovative, creative ideas come from everyone and everywhere. And I say, get those brilliant people on your team, learn from them, fund them, raise them up, listen to them, and join Women in Voice. We are a really welcoming community, and we are so excited to have you along for the ride. This presentation has been Voice by Everyone, for everyone. I'm your presenter, Dr. Joan Palmiter Bajorek, and I'm really excited to learn from your perspectives and your projects and examples about what you're excited about in this multimodal, multilingual future and what integrated builds look like all around the world for all kinds of different people. I hope you've enjoyed this. I look forward to hearing your feedback and some of the things that you're working on. And it has been a pleasure to connect with you. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and think more about how to be more present in the voice ecosystem. Signing off here from Seattle.